Across the United States, as you well know, particularly women of color, survivors of domestic and sexual violence, they find themselves punished for being victimized. Now, how could that possibly work? Well, it does each and every day. And when they try to use force to try to protect themselves or their children, the justice system is punishing not only their trauma, they're punishing them in the criminal system. And there is bias, there are legal limitations that are at play, there are archaic and outdated laws as well. And this panel is going to bring together survivors and policymakers and lawyers and justice reform leaders who are so dynamic in how they're trying to approach what is happening. And they're going to explore transformative legislation, like the Oklahoma Survivors Act, which allows courts finally to consider evidence of abuse in sentencing. Now, the fact that that's novel and happening just now should tell you a lot about where we are. And also, our panelists are going to talk about where we go from here, because I don't believe in being a part of anything that does not give us our marching orders. So are you ready to hear them? Good, me too. Let's bring out Alexandra Bailey, a two-time survivor of violent crime who has dedicated her career, sitting right next to me, to supporting survivors, impacted persons, and advocates working to challenge the nation's life sentencing laws and replacing them with a restorative approach to justice and accountability. Also welcome Holly Harris. She's also here with us as well. I'll have her say, but Lisa Moss first. Let's bring out Lisa Moss. I see you right there. Come on, Lisa. Lisa Ray Moss, I'm delighted to meet, and for all of you to see here, please have a seat and welcome. On January 8th of this year, this woman was set free after serving 34 years. She had been convicted of first-degree murder in the death of her husband, Mike Moss, who she says abused her physically and abused her sexually. She has become now an advocate for domestic violence victims and for judicial reform and sentencing reform in these important cases. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I want to bring out next Nadia. Nadia Shihata is a founding partner of Shihata and Geddes LLP. Oh, well, you're not Nadia, but you can come out anyway. No, come on out. I mean, look, hey, I want to hear from you. This is Andrea Lyon, and she's a renowned lawyer, author, and former law school dean, an expert in defending clients in death penalty cases, and she's recorded 19 wins defending defendants in 19 capital cases. That is impressive. Now we have Nadia Shihata, thank you, founding partner of Shihata and Geddes LLP, a law firm dedicated to civil rights and sexual misconduct matters. She is a former federal prosecutor for the Eastern District of New York in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and she was one of the lead prosecutors in the R. Kelly prosecution as well. And coming up next, we've got Holly Harris, who is the founder and president of The Network, which drives bipartisan collaboration on evidence-based judicial and legislative reforms. I told you I have a dynamite panel, right? Thank you for being here, all of you. I want to begin with you, Alexandra Bailey. You come to this work with direct and personal experience. In fact, your journey, I think, needs to be shared for people here to better understand what has motivated you and driven you in this moment, and why are you such a staunch advocate?
Well, my family originally hails from Tunica, Louisiana. Okay, so one person knows where that is. But everybody knows what Angola Prison is, and we are the town that abuts Angola Prison. And my great-grandmother was a cook at Angola. And when I was a victim of one of my own family members that resulted in a death penalty trial, what became clear to me, even being a kid, was that what you, as a survivor in the situation, want better align with what the system wants, or you should expect to be sidelined. And so I think I've always had a bit of a bee in my bonnet about it. But unfortunately, as a grown woman, when I suffered domestic violence myself, I could have been Lisa. I think I was a split moment away from being a woman who had to save her own life against a spouse who had all of the wealth, recognition, and resources that I think probably would have guaranteed that I served the rest of my life in prison.
Lisa, I want to bring you into this conversation on that point because I want you to explain a little bit about the hurdles and what you were up against when you were trying to share with the justice system, the legal system that was prosecuting you, what you were enduring at the hands of your husband and how that did not factor in to the way you were treated.
So when I went to trial, when I was arrested, I was told not to tell by my defense attorney, a paid attorney, don't tell anything that happened about the abuse because it leads to motive. But I kept trying to tell people. During the abuse that we endured, my daughter and I took her to Department of Mental Health, the Department of Human Services, and asked for help. Nobody did anything. They did the investigative work. We didn't even know, I did not even know that there was a DHS report until we went for the resentencing under this law, under the Oklahoma Survivors Act. And it finally came out. There were so many things that were hidden during my hearing. It wasn't about what happened to me. They didn't want to hear our story. They wanted to prosecute, and they wanted a prosecution. They wanted me in prison. So my brother stepped in to take care of my daughter and myself, and we both ended up in prison with a life without the possibility of parole sentence. After serving a little over 34 years, this law came into play, and had it not been for Alexandra and Colleen McCarty and the Oklahoma Appleseed, Oklahoma legislators and the governor who got this bill through and signed into law, making it retroactive, I would not be sitting here today. So 4.5 months ago, I was in a prison cell, and today I'm in New York City. Thank God. There has to be some transparency. The prosecutors and attorneys need to be held accountable for what they do and what they don't allow. Things should not be allowed to be hidden during the trial. If it goes, there's no justifying what happened. I'll never try to justify what happened, but there is an explanation. And I'll live with that for the rest of my life. But I'm grateful for a second chance at life.
We're very happy that you're here, and thank you.
Thank you so
I just
much.
wonder, I have to ask before we go on to everyone else, what was it like when you got the word that you were going to be released, that the work legislatively that was accomplished would apply to you and retroactively, not just going forward? What was that moment like when you realized, just in January, that you would be free?
When I heard the words, time served, free to go, that's an overwhelming moment that I think was really what we'd prayed for, what we'd hoped for all those years and believed for. But gosh, it was an overwhelming moment, and I thought, finally we're heard, finally our story is heard, and just some vindication.
Wow.
Yeah.
Andrea, I noticed when she was speaking about working with defense counsel who wanted to sort of hide the abuse, you had a visceral reaction. Describe why.
Because that is beyond stupid and wrong. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I'm just going to say it anyway. apologize for a member of my profession that didn't have enough damn sense to understand how important the context of what you did and why you did it is. There's a reason that we have differentiation in the law between a first-degree murder and second-degree murder, et cetera, because we recognize, and we should recognize, human frailty, and that pressure can get to the place that what else can you do? And I know that this was new-ish at the time that you were being tried, but it wasn't that new. I was using it. I don't understand how anyone can feel okay about representing a person and not listening to them, telling their story, and being their real, to the heart advocate. And I wish I could have been there with you. I really do.
Explain a little bit about, if you could, and obviously this would not have been your choice, and you would not have operated your defense of Lisa in this way. But your attorney mentioned the idea of, I don't want to get this into the motive. It almost sounded like there was some, in that attorney's mind, justifiable basis to protect her. Is there some logic that we're missing here? Is there some method to that, post 34-year madness?
Not that I can see. The thing is that if the crime seems inexplicable, explaining the context is only going to help. And I don't, as I said, I don't know this lawyer. I don't know why. He was a he, right? Yeah, I figured. Sorry. Why he was afraid to confront what he needed to confront. It is not easy. And, those of us who be in courtrooms, it's not easy to stand up and say what you see in a courtroom. There's a myth that if you know the true name of a dragon, you have power over it. And in my view, if you name what you see, if you see a judge behaving in a racist manner, which I see all the time, if you don't say anything, you're complicit. You are complicit. And that's why I hope that other people that are listening here care about women in criminal justice and are unafraid to stand up. And if they need help, just call me. I'll help you.
We believe you, and it also gives us a perfect segue, because as you were talking, shame, or whether it's self-inflicted or imposed upon you, societally or otherwise, has a really big role in the way in which women are dealt with in the criminal justice system, and it is distinct. And when she's talking about the silence as complicity, Nadia, I wonder if you can expound upon the question that seems to be the judgmental question that seems to loom very largely over women who are survivors and continuous victimized by domestic violence. The question of, why did they stay? Why didn't she just leave? You can think of all the different questions people are asking, even today, as major trials are going on. As a prosecutor, how do you address and grapple with that bias that's imposed against people who are victimized?
Yeah, so I've dealt with this in the context of prosecuting sex trafficking and forced labor type of cases, where often this is the question. You have survivors and victims testifying, and the question is, you've been in this relationship for years, why haven't you just left? And the truth is, juries, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys all need to be educated about this topic to fully understand it. And so often in these types of cases, you're putting on an expert to explain just how coercive control works, how it's not just physical violence, but also financial control, psychological abuse, and the reasons that people might not react in ways that you would expect if you haven't yourself gone through this. But it's really all about education, and a lot of it is about educating prosecutors too, because there is so much discretion in the system, including in who you charge, what you charge them with, what sentencing recommendations you make, and without a full understanding of the context of these situations, you're not going to end up with a just result.
It's so important when you think about it. I often, when I was prosecuting, you had to guard against, I called it the law and order effect, when we're so used to watching Law and Order that you think a crime is committed, a suspect identified, somebody prosecuted, and the trial's over in 47 minutes, and you had time for snacks, right? There was DNA, there was video, it was all the things people expect to be a part of a trial, and then you get in the real world and you're like, no, there weren't any cameras, no, there was no DNA, this was a he said, she said, or this was a he said scenario. And you are combating that, but you're also combating, as you're mentioning, the court of public opinion. And people who are in the jury box who are judging as much as the judge is. And that, it makes it very terrifying, I would assume, as well, as someone in your situation who had to endure a trial and be silenced about that context. Did you feel the weight of judgment, or that maybe my lawyer knows better than the experience I had and could vocalize it?
Well, I kept asking, don't we need to put this information in? Why wouldn't you let me say what happened? And he just kept saying the same thing. I've got this. He really would not communicate with me. And it was small town, election year, politics. Yeah.
Let's talk about politics. I'm looking at you.
Present.
Because as much as, I mean, one of the shortcuts to educating the public is through legislation. But it requires people to understand why you need it, to fight for it, to advocate for it, and to understand why it should be prioritized over what they may feel are the more appropriate priorities in their everyday lives. Talk to us a little bit about the hurdles, the relentless struggles, frankly, of trying to prioritize the experience of domestic abuse victims, survivors, and legislating accordingly.
Well, first of all, I know you got mad at me earlier when I said this, but I feel completely unworthy to be on stage with these incredible women. Their stories, what they've overcome, what they've achieved. I think it's the foundation for all the broader criminal justice reform wins, and it's what's inspired me to be a small part of the movement. I remember when I very first visited a jail, I want to say this was back in like 2015, and we visited, with the men in the men's wing, and they all talked about they got plenty of visitors, and they seemed in relatively good spirits, for incarcerated people. When we went to go talk to the women, when I asked them, how many of you all receive visitors, not one hand went up, not one. They were shrouded in shame. They all had stories of domestic abuse, domestic violence. For some reason, they felt like it was their fault. Many of them had become hooked on drugs by their partners. It was heartbreaking to me. And it was for the very first time it hit me, okay, this is a system that has been built by men, for men, largely managed by men and regulated by men. And so, of course, the unique needs of incarcerated women were not being met. And I remember calling up Jessica Jackson. Where is she? Who could tell her no? But I remember calling her up and saying, let's do this convening. Let's do a convening in Washington, D.C., and let's call it Women Unshackled, and let's see if we can get maybe 100 people to come and talk about this issue. Y'all, we got 600 people came to Washington, D.C. I had to call Laura Arnold, a wonderful philanthropist in Houston, and say, I think we're going to need a bigger boat. But it was incredible to hear these stories. It was inspiring. And you talked about politics. These were the stories that resonated with people on both sides of the aisle. We had, staunch conservative Republicans like Doug Collins, like sitting down and talking with the great Cory Booker. And, there was born, really, it was the start of the conversations that led to the First Step Act. So I'm so grateful for all of you and the work that you're doing, whatever we can do to be helpful. Please reach out to me. We primarily work to support lawmakers who are working across the aisle and supporting these reforms, but it's your stories that are inspiring them and moving this work forward, so thank you.
I'm so glad that you've expressed it. Yes, please. And this is why I got mad at her. I said, we have no imposter syndrome here, okay? And it's so important, I think, especially because each one of us either can be, has the story or can be the storyteller. And the more that you ensure that people don't relegate the experiences of people to anecdotes or, oh, that's just her, or that's just him, or that's just them, the better as a society we can be to actually effectuate changes. And Alexandra, on that point, being triggered by what people are seeing in the news today and beyond, there is no political assignment or party that's affiliated with violence, domestic assault, sexual assault, and yet so often people are concerned that they can only address it when it's about a political issue. How can people overcome that challenge?
I think what you said is so incredibly true. Name the dragon. People say, well, I like this law, but, it really only helps women. The first recipients of this law were Lisa and a male trafficking victim. Here in New York City, or New York State, was a gentleman named Malumba, who might be in the audience, actually, I hope he is. Abuse can happen to anybody. And I think politics right now is really fear-driven. You win elections by telling people who the boogeyman is, making them afraid of it, telling them who to blame for it, and then going after those people. And so my interest was really to pull those tactics and just use them to tell the truth. There is something you should be afraid of. And it's a system that doesn't understand abuse, violence, trauma, that is not trauma-informed.
Do we not understand it, or is it something we sweep under the rug because it's not the conversations people want to be having? I fail to understand how people don't understand. I think everyone in this room and every person in the world, I never know anyone's story, but I believe violence has touched everyone's lives.
It has. There's no question about it. Everybody has lost somebody. There is no untraumatized person that exists in the world. Or if they do, I'd love to meet you, write a book, we'll all buy it. But there's no untraumatized person in the world.
So then talk to us how the legislation got passed. How did that work?
It was really incredible, and Lisa can talk to you about this. So, as you know, most prisons won't allow you to really talk or study the people who are incarcerated. So myself and Oklahoma Appleseed sent in a storytelling guide to the women's prison to a woman named April Wilkins, whose case we filed, and we said, self-identify, tell us about you. And we told them all the potential risks that could happen, and we thought, maybe we'll get a couple back. The drive had over 160 stories within a week or two. And they organized inside and came together and supported each other and talked about everything that had led to their incarceration. And as a strategist, I looked at this and I was like, this is the truth. So I'm going to retry all these cases in the court of public opinion with their permission. This is what actually happened to Lisa. This is actually how she was harmed, and this is how the system responded. And I'm going to bypass all the gatekeepers. I'm going to put it right in your social media, right in your email, and let you as a voter make a decision about whether or not you're going to support your legislator in passing the Oklahoma Survivor Justice Act. And that's when you get a unanimous Senate vote.
Wow. How did it feel, Lisa, to have your story told in that way? Yes, you should apply unanimity, frankly, yes. How did that feel to have that moment? And just time frame-wise, Alexandra, what was this time frame we're talking about?
We passed this bill in 26 months, 2 legislative sessions. It was incredible.
So 3 decades and then 26 months. How did that feel for you to have your story told really on your terms and for people to receive it the way they did?
Well, after 30 plus years, it finally felt like there was a little light at the end of the tunnel, and that somebody finally was going to hear what actually happened, and somebody actually cared. Like, I think that's the biggest thing, is somebody really cared enough to hear what had actually happened to us. It was in the court documents, the few little things that I was allowed to tell in 1990 when I went through court. So there was no just making things up. There were things that were documented, and just to be able to be heard, I think, is the biggest thing. It's really overwhelming. It's surreal that I'm able to even talk about the story today. It was extremely hard in the beginning to speak the truth. Those are things that you don't want told. There was a courtroom full of people that day, which some people say might have made it easier, but it made it a little harder because my daughter was there. She heard all the things that she had probably never heard before. But man, was it a weight lifted when I got to tell the story and when I got to tell the truth and to have it off my shoulders.
Nadia, you know quite well, and having prosecuted many cases that are analogous to what Lisa has explained, the weight that people are carrying, the reluctance, even though they don't want this to happen to anyone else, the reluctance to either come forward, to be cooperative, to be forthcoming. This is almost a minute-by-minute challenge. How do you try to encourage and persuade someone, especially knowing that when you're prosecuting a case, it's United States versus the person? That survivor's name is not included, and you could very well go forward with or without their assistance. But you want them to have that weight lifted. What is that like for you as a prosecutor, and how do you deal with it?
It's very difficult. It's the biggest challenge in these types of cases. Nobody wants to relive the worst periods of their lives on a witness stand in front of a courtroom, not only the jury, but full of random people listening. And you know, the way I have tried to deal with it when I was a prosecutor was to really make it the choice of the person. Did I have subpoena power? Sure. But that was not where I wanted to use my subpoena power to force someone to talk about things that they didn't want to.
And by the way, had you done that, there is it can counteract what you're trying to do, very counterproductive.
Yeah, you don't want to re-victimize someone and who's already had so much power taken away from them, and do it again through the criminal justice system, which unfortunately does happen. There are prosecutors that make different decisions in these circumstances. But it's really a matter of, again, being educated in trauma-informed interviewing, trying to understand what the person is telling you and making it their choice. And usually, if you approach it the right way, you give the survivor an opportunity to tell their story, to be heard, and it ends up being something that they would like to do, or at least feel empowered doing.
And that's without being able to guarantee a result, right, in a prosecution. I know people have that statement, a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich, and they oftentimes, different jurisdictions will tout their prosecution conviction rate, which I take issue with for a number of reasons. We'll get back to that. But you have to have people be willing to come forward and talk, and sometimes the story alone, the exposure, is the only thing you can guarantee they'll have a chance to do. But then, Andrea, on the other side, I mean, obviously from a prosecution standpoint, when you were advocating on behalf of somebody who's been victimized, but what happens when the person is being victimized, essentially, because the person has had to try to use self-defense to protect themselves or others, whether it's children, whether it's pets, whether it's a recurrence of the violence, whatever it might be, and having to defend them against the weight of judgment and that system. What is it like when you have somebody who is the defendant, who has self-defense as a really, really valid explanation?
Well, you know, some of the things that Nadia said apply on the other side as well. People it's very uncomfortable to discuss these personal matters with a group of strangers, let alone, you know, some 6-foot loudmouth lawyer like me. And, you know, I think it's really important that what I try to do is answer that question that you talked about before for the jury, which is why did she stay and why now, right? I mean, I've had police officers say to me, you know, well, she's used to getting her butt kicked, you know, just one more time, who cares? You know, she must like it. I've had people say that to me. Unfortunately, I've had prosecutors say that to me as well. And what I say to them, or what I do when I'm talking to potential jurors, is I ask them this question. And I'm going to ask all of you to think about this for a minute. Have you or anyone you are close to ever stayed in a relationship longer than you should have?
Present. Again.
Right? Everyone has that experience. Now, it may not rise to the level of physical violence, but what hooks people isn't that they're masochistic or something. What hooks them is hope. They hope it will get better. They hope that the person will stop drinking. They hope that the job will show up. They hope. And at a certain point, because you learn to read the way that your abuser behaves, and you know when this is going to be the time, this night it's going to be different, or he's going to go after your daughter, or whatever it is, that moment, you understand that you have to stand up and defend yourself and defend your children. And so the challenge is to help the jury feel what it's like to be knocked down on the ground and to have your husband's foot on your neck so that you can't breathe. Have you ever not been able to breathe? And you have to help people feel that with your client, with you, so that they can understand in a visceral kind of way, why now?
Yeah, that's an applause break.
That has to happen legislatively as well. Because prosecutors, as you know, they are enforcing and executing the law. Who writes it? Lawmakers, right? And their role, of course, is on behalf of the people. And we know that all politics is personal and everything personal is supposed to be politics. But the 10-foot pole, Holly, that people sometimes want to extend between legislation that would help people and actually the people who would be benefited by it, which is everyone, prospectively or not. How do you take away that distance, that emotional compartmentalization and distance that people want to say, oh, that's horrible, oh my God, that's a horrible story. Now I think I'll talk about tariffs. When you're thinking, no, I love the hypothetical and the big picture world, and all that is important as well. But there is the day-to-day experiences of people. How do you get politicians who are notoriously warm and always effective? How do you get them to be able to confront really the underbelly of emotions and what happens?
Well, look, they did it. I mean, I want you to think about how remarkable the Oklahoma achievement is. I mean, this is a deep red state. Okay, it's a supermajority Republican legislature led by, and then you have a governor, extremely conservative governor, in Kevin Stitt and his wife Sarah. I was just out in Oklahoma with Governor Stitt and his wife, and I'll tell you, I got the opposite effect, which is we can't get that guy to shut up about criminal justice reform. We try to talk to him about energy, and he says, "Well, let me tell you about my criminal justice reform work." He really believes in it, and we talk about narratives that that resonate on both sides of the aisle. You mentioned your daughter. 1 in 4 women who are entering our justice system right now 1 in 4 women is either pregnant or a mother to a child under the age of 1. So we're not just talking about a growing epidemic of incarcerated women, we're talking about a generation of kids growing up without their mothers. And if that doesn't hit you here, then you have no business being in public service. Mm-hmm. So these narratives, these stories, are equally impactful on the Republican side of the aisle and the Democratic side of the aisle. I believe in the bipartisan work. I believe it's still achievable. I think it's lazy thinking to think, well, because this person got elected, we'll never be able to do reform. There's always a voice that can speak truth to power. And these voices were able to achieve incredible things in Oklahoma. I believe it can happen all across the country.
You've helped to pass reforms in 11 states. Can you just describe some of what that was like and what types of reforms were enacted, generally speaking?
Well, now, it wasn't 11. It was a lot more than 11.
Okay, well, see, I told her about imposter syndrome.
No, I mean, again, it was about ensuring, and I think this is important in the reform movement, it was about ensuring that the right voices were there. I, for example, realized, when we were pushing the First Step Act, that I might not be the voice that would be impactful to Donald Trump. You know who was? Kim Kardashian. So, I think it's about being, and you and I have talked about this, it's about being innovative strategists and knowing and appreciating when your voice isn't the right voice and going out and finding that person, who is going to resonate with the lawmaker. And that's where, the strategy comes in. But certainly, the stories of the women that we've heard from today, they'll resonate with anyone. What you went through is horrific. And I do think we've got to put women at the forefront of this fight. Look, when I was working in criminal justice reform, even the advocates were primarily men. Mm-hmm. So I do think it's important, to have women leading the charge, sharing their stories, because I do think, again, that's the foundation and the basis for passing the broader reform work.
Can I just piggyback on that real quick? You have to remember that what Lisa was charged with was first-degree homicide. Life without the possibility of parole, which talk to most legislators, and as a matter of fact, we're working on the same bill in Connecticut, drop LWOP New England is, and the champion's lawyer walks into the office and goes, well, obviously we're excluding all of these offenses. We're excluding first degree, we're excluding felony murder, we're excluding basically anything with the word murder in it. To which I was
meaning, just to explain, meaning by excluding it, it meant that the second look or anything else would not apply to that.
Exactly, they would not be able to apply under this law. This law is about extreme sentencing and its misapplication. And the system's lack of understanding of trauma sits at the heart of its misapplication. And the concept that people can't change, the system doesn't get it wrong, that this is not, that whole label that they're like, okay, well, you must be the worst of the worst if your offense label is X. And that is so far off base. It not only excludes the idea that people change, but it actually doesn't call into question whether or not, they're like, we're out here protecting public safety. From her? Anybody scared? You're protecting them from what exactly? Like, you're protecting the public from what exactly? There's this huge myth that's been propagated, and there's such an addiction to finality in the system, not justice, finality. Mm-hmm. And digging that out with the Survivor Justice Act, I think, and now it's so funny because all the people who were against it, who were fighting us tooth and nail, they're hugging her on the floor of the Senate.
Right.
Well, they were with you all along.
Yeah, right.
You're right. Yeah, no, you're right.
They were not with you all along, not at all.
But the thing is that I always say, I don't care when you get with it, just get with it. So you like it now, great. Help us do it in other states. Help it be implemented. Tell your prosecutors when they come and tell you some nonsense, that's nonsense. And we're not having this discussion. Because we do things differently now. And that's what needs to happen. We have to dig out this addiction to just doing things the same way.
Andrea, talk about that finale. Yes, please. You've defended in capital cases really the ultimate in finality when we talk about our
Right.
system of justice. What is the pressure like in those conversations and the defense strategy like, knowing about this addiction to finality and fighting against a system that does not want to be self-aware or either ever be wrong in public?
Well, yeah, that's the issue. I have a couple of a man that I exonerated recently. It took me a long time, and I found the murderer and got him to confess, and that wasn't enough for the prosecution. I'm like, wait, what? And so, I mean, that can be very frustrating. The other thing, I just speaking to what you had said, Alexandra, was that the first-degree murder idea is because it has a lot to do with the fact that we don't think that women have the same right to defend themselves as men. Men can fight each other, and you know that's like tough or macho or whatever it is. But if a woman fights back, it's unfeminine. You know, I've been called all those names, I'm sure you can imagine. And I first decided I wanted to go to law school, and everyone has an uncle like this, said, you can't be a lawyer, all women lawyers are dykes. And I'm like, I don't know what that is, but it sounds bad. You know, and so what I'm saying is that it's really important to understand not just what has happened, but why it has happened. My job in a death penalty case is to help the jurors live through the trauma that informed my client's life and caused him to become whoever he has become. And that requires a great deal. Secondary trauma is a real thing. The first time that I saw a client of mine who was facing a capital case, she couldn't tell me about what happened, so all she could do was unbutton the blouse so that I could see where he had put cigars and cigarettes out on her. And I have to find a way to talk about that with strangers who haven't been able to avoid jury duty. The responsibility is overwhelming sometimes, but you cannot believe the nobility of people when you give them the opportunity to stand up for what's right, when you give them the opportunity to hear, really hear, what your life was like, what this young man's life was like, what it meant that he got hit in the head and his IQ dropped by 20 points and no one noticed. And no one ever asked him why there was a square on his head from where the bread truck hit him, because no one looked. And that's what we do. That's what all of us are doing. And that's what I hope people that are listening want to do. Tell the stories, make people listen, talk to them, find that common ground. You know, when I was being interviewed to be dean, in Indiana, they kept sort of asking me, can I talk to Republicans, basically, because I'm so obviously liberal. I'm like, who do you think's on my jury? I talk to Republicans all the time. We can talk to other people if we just try.
I want to give you the last word, Lisa. You have now, within a mere 5 months, not even a full 5 months, you have transformed into an advocate hearing stories about women and men who are similarly situated, who have the same hopes and desires that you know uniquely so well. To have their stories told, to have someone listen, to feel like they're not being let down by the system, to pay it forward and also heal. Leave us with what you carry with you to keep yourself motivated, but also to protect your own peace. What are you doing to make sure that you can stay the course?
Well, first of all, I have a strong faith, a strong belief in God. And so prayer gets me through my study time in the Word. But just to everyone who needs to have their stories told and needs to be heard, I would just say hang on, and trust that we're coming to help you, we're coming to hear you, and you are valuable, and your story deserves to be heard.
Please applaud this woman and all the women on this panel. My God, thank you so much. Truly inspiring, and to think about that. And I'm really just honored to be a part of this group with all of you. Please extend your hearts and your help to the causes that you hold dear. And I want to thank you all. And whoever, I always think to myself, I don't know who needed to hear that today, but I think it was all of us. If there's someone in particular, our hearts go out and our marching orders will go towards you, okay? Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.